Maria's hands trembled as she adjusted the small blanket around 7-year-old Tommy's fevered body. The hospital room felt cold and sterile, filled with the constant beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell that seemed to cling to everything. She had been here for 3 days straight, sleeping on the uncomfortable hospital chair, and sometimes on the floor when exhaustion finally overcame her. Tommy wasn't her biological son. She had only been dadding his father, David, for 8 months. They had met at the local coffee shop where she worked as a manager, and he would come in every morning before his construction job. David was a single father who had been raising Tommy alone since his mother left when the boy was just 3 years old. The woman had decided that motherhood wasn't for her and disappeared one night, leaving behind only a note and a confused little boy who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. When Maria first met Tommy, she was struck by how polite and well-mannered he was despite his circumstances. David had done an incredible job raising him, teaching him respect, kindness, and responsibility. The boy had his father's warm brown eyes and infectious smile, though lately, that smile had been replaced by worry lines that no 7-year-old should have to carry. It had started with what seemed like a simple cold. Tommy complained of feeling tired and had a slight cough. David thought it was just something going around at school, so he gave him some children's medicine and made sure he got extra rest. But after a week, Tommy's condition worsened. The cough became more persistent, and he developed a high fever that wouldn't break no matter what they tried. Maria had been spending more time at David's house, helping with dinner and homework. She noticed how Tommy's appetite had disappeared and how he seemed to struggle just to climb the stairs to his bedroom. When she suggested they take him to the doctor, David initially hesitated. As a construction worker, he had basic health insurance, but money was always tight. Doctor visits meant, and if tests were needed, the bills could quickly spiral out of control. "I'm sure it's just a bad cold," David had said, though Maria could see the worry in his eyes. "These things just take time to work their way through a kid's system." But Maria's instincts told her something more serious was happening. She had grown up in a large family where her mother had taught her to recognize the signs of real illness versus minor childhood ailments. Tommy's labored breathing, and the way he seemed to be getting weaker each day, set off alarm bells in her mind. On a Thursday evening, when Tommy's fever spiked to 104 degrees and he became delirious, Maria didn't wait for David to make the decision. She scooped the boy up in her arms and told David they were going to the emergency room immediately. David's face went pale when he saw his son's condition, and all concerns about money instantly disappeared. The emergency room was a blur of activity. Nurses rushed Tommy into a treatment room while Maria and David answered what felt like hundreds of questions about his symptoms, medical history, and insurance information. Maria found herself providing many of the answers because she had been the one paying closest attention to Tommy's declining condition over the past several days. After what felt like hours of waiting, a doctor finally came to speak with them. Dr. Richardson was a kind-faced pediatrician who had been working in emergency medicine for over 20 years. She explained that Tommy had developed pneumonia, and it had progressed to a serious stage. His oxygen levels were dangerously low, and they needed to admit him immediately for treatment. The good news is that we caught it before it became life-threatening, Dr. Richardson explained. But he's going to need round-the-clock monitoring and aggressive treatment with antibiotics and oxygen therapy. We're looking at probably a week in the hospital, maybe longer depending on how he responds to treatment. David's face crumpled as the reality of the situation hit him. His little boy was seriously ill, and he felt terrible that he hadn't recognized the severity of the symptoms sooner. Maria immediately put her arm around his shoulders, offering what comfort she could while trying to process the doctor's words herself. The financial reality was daunting. Even with insurance, a week-long hospital stay would result in thousands of dollars in medical bills. David worked for a small construction company that didn't offer paid sick leave, so every day he stayed at the hospital meant lost wages on top of mounting medical expenses. Maria could see him calculating numbers in his head, trying to figure out how they would manage both financially and practically. "I need to talk to my boss," David said, running his hands through his hair. "Maybe I can work something out, come in for a few hours during the day and stay here at night." "No," Maria said firmly. "Tommy needs you here, especially during the day when the doctors are making their rounds. You need to be here to ask questions and make decisions about his care. I can handle staying with him at night." David started to protest, but Maria cut him off. "I already called my assistant manager at the coffee shop. She's going to cover my shifts for the rest of the week. Tommy is more important than anything else right now." That first night in the hospital was one of the longest of Maria's life. David had finally agreed to go home and get some rest after Maria promised she would call him immediately if there were any changes in Tommy's condition. The hospital staff had wheeled in a small cot for her to sleep on, but every sound from the machines monitoring Tommy's vital signs kept her awake. Around midnight, Tommy's fever spiked again, and his breathing became more labored. Maria immediately called for a nurse, who quickly summoned the on-call doctor. They adjusted his medication and increased his oxygen, but it was clear that the next few days would be critical. Maria spent the rest of the night sitting in the chair next to his bed, holding his small hand and talking to him softly even though he was mostly unconscious from the medication. When David arrived early the next morning with coffee and breakfast from the hospital cafeteria, he found Maria still awake in the chair. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them, but her attention was completely focused on Tommy. She was reading to him from a book she had brought from his room at home, a collection of adventure stories that he loved. "How was his night?" David asked, though he could see from Maria's exhausted appearance that it hadn't been easy. "Rough around midnight, but he's been stable since then," Maria reported, never taking her eyes off Tommy's sleeping face. "The nurse said his fever broke about an hour ago, which is a good sign. Dr. Richardson will be making rounds in a few hours." David was amazed by Maria's dedication. She had only been part of their lives for 8 months, yet here she was, sacrificing her own comfort and well-being to care for his son. He tried to convince her to go home and shower, get some real sleep in a proper bed, but she refused to leave Tommy's side. "What if he wakes up and doesn't see a familiar face?" she asked. "He's been through enough confusion and fear already. I want him to know that someone who loves him is always here." The second day brought some improvement in Tommy's condition, but also new challenges. His appetite was still non-existent, and the medical team was concerned about keeping his strength up during the recovery process. Maria took charge of this aspect of his care, working with the hospital nutritionist to find foods that might appeal to a sick 7-year-old. She brought in his favorite stuffed animal and some of his books from home, anything that might provide comfort and familiarity in the sterile hospital environment. By the third day, Maria had established a routine with the nursing staff. She had learned all of their names and the schedule for Tommy's medications. She kept detailed notes about his symptoms, his appetite, his sleep patterns, and any concerns she noticed. When doctors came to check on Tommy, Maria was able to provide comprehensive updates about his progress. The hospital staff began to comment on Maria's dedication. Nurses mentioned that in all their years of experience, they had rarely seen someone who wasn't a biological parent show such commitment to a child's care. One older nurse, who had been working in pediatrics for 30 years, pulled Maria aside during her break. "Honey, I've seen a lot of families come through these halls," said gently. "I've seen biological parents who barely visit, and I've seen step-parents who treat their partner's children like burdens. What you're doing for this little boy is extraordinary. That child is lucky to have you in his life." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't thought of her actions as extraordinary. She was simply doing what felt right. Tommy needed care and love during this frightening time, and she was in a position to provide it. The fact that she wasn't his biological mother seemed irrelevant when faced with a sick child who needed comfort. On the third night, as Tommy finally began to show real signs of improvement, Maria made a decision. The small cot the hospital had provided was uncomfortable and too far from Tommy's bed for her liking. She wanted to be close enough to hear any change in his breathing or to respond immediately if he called out during the night. So she arranged the extra blankets on the floor next to his bed and settled down to sleep there instead. David arrived early the next morning to find Maria asleep on the floor, one arm stretched up to rest on Tommy's bed so she could maintain physical contact with him even while sleeping. Tommy was awake and seemed brighter than he had in days. When he saw his father, he smiled weakly and pointed down at Maria. "Dad, Maria slept on the floor next to me all night," Tommy whispered. "She said she wanted to be close in case I needed anything. She's been taking really good care of me." David felt his heart constrict as he looked at this woman who had entered their lives and immediately embraced them both with such complete devotion. Maria was giving everything she had to care for his son, asking for nothing in return except the opportunity to help. She was sleeping on hospital floors, missing work, and putting her own needs aside completely. When Maria woke up and saw David watching her, she immediately sat up and asked about Tommy's night. She had kept mental notes of every time he stirred, every small change in his breathing, every request for water or adjustment of his blanket. Her first concern was always Tommy's well-being, never her own discomfort or exhaustion. Dr. Richardson arrived for morning rounds with good news. Tommy's latest blood work showed significant improvement, and his lung function was returning to normal. If he continued to progress at this rate, he might be able to go home in another day or two. The relief on both David's and Maria's faces was obvious, but Maria's first response was to ask what they needed to do to ensure Tommy's complete recovery. "We'll need to continue the antibiotic treatment at home for another week," Dr. Richardson explained. "He'll need to take medication 4 times a day, get plenty of rest, and have his activity limited until his strength returns. Someone will need to monitor his breathing and temperature regularly to make sure there's no relapse." Maria was already taking notes, asking detailed questions about the medication schedule, what symptoms to watch for, and when to call if they had concerns. David realized that without Maria's organizational skills and attention to detail, managing Tommy's recovery at home would have been overwhelming for him to handle alone while trying to return to work. That evening, as Tommy was finally well enough to eat a full meal and even laugh at some silly jokes Maria told him, David reflected on everything that had happened over the past few days. He had always known that Maria was a special person, but seeing her dedication to Tommy had revealed depths of character that amazed him. She had shown a level of love and commitment that many biological parents never demonstrated. Maria had given up her own comfort, her work schedule, her sleep, and her personal needs to care for a child who wasn't even legally connected to her. She had slept on floors, eaten vending machine food, and worn the same clothes for days, all without a single complaint. Her focus had been entirely on Tommy's well-being and recovery. As David watched Maria gently brush Tommy's hair while reading him a bedtime story, he realized that what he was witnessing wasn't just kindness or temporary devotion. This was the kind of love that builds families, the kind of commitment that creates lasting bonds between people who choose to care for each other regardless of biological connections. Tommy had found more than just medical care during his hospital stay. He had experienced the profound love of a woman who had chosen to become his mother in every way that mattered, even though no official documents or legal ceremonies had made it so. Maria's actions during those difficult days had spoken louder than any words could about her feelings for both Tommy and David. The transition from hospital to home recovery proved to be just as challenging as the initial crisis, but Maria approached it with the same unwavering dedication she had shown during Tommy's hospitalization. David's small two-bedroom apartment suddenly felt inadequate for the complex care routine that Tommy needed, but Maria quickly reorganized the space to create a healing environment. She converted the living room into a temporary recovery room, moving Tommy's bed downstairs so he wouldn't have to navigate the stairs while he was still weak. Maria researched proper ventilation techniques and air purification methods to help Tommy's healing lungs. She borrowed a humidifier from her own apartment and set up a medication station with clearly labeled pills, a detailed schedule, and backup thermometers. David had to return to work after taking 3 unpaid days off during the hospital crisis. The construction company he worked for was understanding, but had deadlines to meet and couldn't afford to have workers absent indefinitely. This meant that Maria became Tommy's primary caregiver during the day, managing his medication schedule, monitoring his symptoms, and providing the emotional support he needed during his recovery. Every morning before David left for work, Maria would arrive at 6:30 with fresh groceries and a detailed plan for the day. She had researched foods that would help Tommy regain his strength and boost his immune system. Her background managing the coffee shop had taught her organizational skills and attention to detail that proved invaluable in managing Tommy's care. "You don't have to do this," David told her repeatedly. "I can figure out how to manage his care and work. Maybe I can find a babysitter or see if my neighbor Mrs. can check on him during the day." But Maria wouldn't hear of it. "Tommy needs consistent care from someone who understands his medical situation," she insisted. "Mrs. is sweet, but she's 78 years old and doesn't understand the medication schedule. And a babysitter doesn't know Tommy's personality or what comforts him when he's feeling scared or frustrated." The truth was that Maria had used up all her vacation days at the coffee shop and was now taking unpaid leave to care for Tommy. Her own finances were strained, but she never mentioned this to David. She had moved back in with her sister temporarily to save on rent money, giving up her independence to ensure she could afford to miss work while Tommy needed her. Tommy's recovery wasn't linear. Some days he seemed almost back to normal, laughing and asking when he could return to school. Other days, he would have coughing fits that scared both him and Maria, or his energy would plummet and he would sleep most of the day. Maria learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether Tommy was having a good day or struggling, adjusting their activities and his medication timing accordingly. She created a routine that combined medical care with emotional healing. Mornings started with medication and a nutritious breakfast, followed by gentle exercises that the physical therapist had recommended to help Tommy regain his strength. Maria would read to him, work on simple homework assignments to keep his mind engaged, and play quiet games that didn't overexert him but kept him entertained. The most challenging aspect of Tommy's recovery was his emotional state. The experience of being seriously ill had shaken his confidence and made him more clingy and fearful than before. He worried constantly about getting sick again and became anxious whenever he felt the slightest bit tired or noticed any minor symptom. Maria recognized that healing his emotional wounds was just as important as addressing his physical recovery. She developed strategies to help Tommy process his fears and rebuild his confidence. They created a bravery journal where Tommy could write or draw about his feelings, his progress, and things he was looking forward to doing when he was completely well. Maria shared stories about times when she had been scared but had found courage to overcome difficult situations, helping Tommy understand that fear was normal but didn't have to control his life. One particularly difficult day, about a week after Tommy came home from the hospital, he had a setback. His cough returned with intensity and his fever spiked again. Maria immediately called Dr. Richardson's office and was told to bring Tommy to the emergency room for evaluation. The possibility of returning to the hospital terrified Tommy, and he became inconsolable. "I don't want to go back there," Tommy sobbed, clinging to Maria. What if I have to stay again? What if I get sicker? I want to stay home with you and Dad. Maria's heart broke seeing the fear in Tommy's eyes, but she knew she had to be strong for him. Tommy, remember what we wrote in your bravery journal about being scared but doing what we need to do anyway. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean we're not afraid. It means we do the right thing even when we are afraid. She wrapped him in his favorite blanket and carried him to the car, singing the silly songs they had made up during his hospital stay to distract him from his anxiety. At the emergency room, Maria advocated fiercely for Tommy, ensuring that the medical staff understood his history and his current fears. She requested that he be seen quickly to minimize his anxiety and asked that the same doctor who had treated him before be consulted if possible. Fortunately, the setback was minor, just a temporary flare-up that required a slight adjustment to his medication rather than readmission to the hospital. But the experience reinforced for Maria how important it was for Tommy to have consistent, knowledgeable care from someone who understood not just his medical needs, but his emotional vulnerabilities as well. Davids began to notice the strain he was under, trying to balance work responsibilities with worry about his son and guilt about leaving Maria to handle so much of Tommy's care. His supervisor, Frank, pulled him aside one afternoon after noticing David's distraction and exhaustion. "Look, Dave, I know you're going through a tough time with your boy being sick," Frank said. "We've all been there with our kids at some point, but I'm worried about you, man. You're making mistakes on the job site, and that's dangerous for everyone. Maybe you need to take some more time off, figure out your family situation." David's heart sank. He couldn't afford to take more unpaid leave, and he certainly couldn't afford to lose his job. But Frank was right, his focus wasn't where it needed to be. Every day at work, his mind was at home with Tommy and Maria, wondering how the day was going, whether Tommy was having a good day or struggling, whether Maria was managing okay on her own. That evening, David came home to find Maria helping Tommy with a jigsaw puzzle at the dining room table. Tommy was laughing at something Maria had said, and his color looked better than it had in days. The apartment was clean, dinner was cooking in the oven, and everything seemed peaceful and well organized. But David could see the exhaustion in Maria's eyes and the way she moved carefully, as if her back was sore from constantly leaning over to help Tommy. After Tommy went to bed, David and Maria sat in the kitchen while she organized the next day's medication schedule. David watched her efficient movements, the way she double-checked everything, the notes she made about Tommy's symptoms and progress. She had become completely invested in Tommy's well-being, and David realized that she was sacrificing far more than he had initially understood. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me," David said. "How much is this costing you? I mean really costing you the missed work, the gas money driving back and forth, the extra food you keep bringing over. I know you're spending your own money on Tommy's care, and I can't let you bankrupt yourself for us." Maria looked up from her notes, surprised by the directness of the question. She had hoped that David wouldn't realize the extent of her financial sacrifice, but she should have known that his observant nature would eventually notice the signs. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. Tommy needs care, and I'm in a position to provide it. Money can be earned back, but this time with Tommy, helping him heal and feel safe, this is irreplaceable. It does matter, David insisted. You're not his legal guardian or his stepmother or even his family by any official definition. You don't have any obligation to sacrifice your financial stability for us. What you're doing goes so far beyond normal kindness that I don't even know how to process it. Maria was quiet for a long moment, continuing to organize pills into daily containers. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. David, I know that legally and technically, Tommy isn't my responsibility. But responsibility isn't just about legal obligations or biological connections. When you love someone, you take responsibility for their well-being because you want to, not because you have to. She paused in her work and looked directly at David. I love Tommy. I love the way he asks thoughtful questions and the way he always says thank you, even for small things. I love how he tries to be brave even when he's scared, and how he still believes in magic and possibilities. When I see him struggling or in pain, I feel it in my own heart. That's not something I chose, it just happened. David felt a lump forming in his throat. But you barely know us. We've only been together for 8 months, and most of that time has been casual dating. You never signed up to be a nurse or a caregiver or to deal with medical emergencies and sick children. You're right, I never planned for this, Maria acknowledged. But life doesn't usually ask our permission before it changes everything. When Tommy got sick, I had a choice. I could step back and protect myself from the complications and expenses and emotional investment, or I could step forward and help a child who needed care. It wasn't even really a choice for me. How could I walk away from Tommy when he needed help? David realized that Maria's commitment to Tommy stemmed from something deeper than duty or even romantic love. She had seen a child in need and had responded with the full force of her character, offering everything she had without calculation or expectation of return. Her actions revealed a fundamental goodness that David had never encountered before. The conversation was interrupted by Tommy calling out from his makeshift bedroom in the living room. He was having one of his nightmares, a side effect of the medications and the stress of his illness. Maria immediately went to him, sitting on the edge of his bed and stroking his hair until his breathing calmed and he drifted back to sleep. Watching her gentle care of his son, David felt a profound shift in his understanding of what family could mean. Maria had chosen to love Tommy not because of biological connection or legal obligation, but because of who Tommy was as a person, and because love had grown naturally between them. Her commitment during his illness had only deepened that bond. Over the following weeks, as Tommy's physical health improved, David began to notice other changes in their household dynamic. Tommy had started referring to Maria as "my Maria" when talking to his friends or teachers. He would save up stories from his day to share with her when she arrived each morning, and he had begun asking when she was going to move in permanently. Maria's own living situation had become increasingly complicated. Staying with her sister was supposed to be temporary, but Tommy's recovery was taking longer than initially expected. Her sister Lisa was patient and understanding, but the arrangement was crowded and stressful for everyone involved. Maria was essentially living out of a suitcase, commuting between her sister's apartment, David's house, and the coffee shop when she could pick up occasional shifts. One evening, after Tommy had been particularly clingy and had asked Maria 3 times if she was definitely coming back the next morning, David realized that the uncertainty of the situation was affecting Tommy's emotional recovery. The boy had been abandoned by his biological mother and was now terrified that Maria might disappear from his life as well. "Tommy's scared you're going to leave," David said as he and Maria cleaned up after dinner. "He keeps asking me if you're going to keep coming over after he's completely well. I think he's worried that once he doesn't need medical care anymore, you won't want to be around." Maria stopped drying dishes and turned to face David. "What did you tell him?" "I didn't know what to say," David admitted. "Because honestly, I don't know what happens next either. We started dating casually, and then this crisis happened, and now you're essentially living here and caring for Tommy like you're his mother. But we've never talked about where this is all heading or what you want for the future." The question hung between them, heavy with implications. David realized that while they had grown incredibly close during Tommy's illness, they had never actually discussed their relationship in any traditional sense. The crisis had thrust them into an intimate family dynamic without the usual progression of dating, falling in love, meeting each other's families, and deciding to build a life together. Maria leaned against the kitchen counter, considering her response carefully. "I want to be honest with you about something, David. When Tommy got sick, my feelings changed. Not just my feelings about him, but about what I want from life. Taking care of him, being part of his recovery, seeing how much he needed someone to just love him unconditionally. It made me realize that this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be Tommy's mother in every way that matters." She paused, gathering courage for the next part. "But I also know that wanting something doesn't mean I have the right to it. Tommy isn't my child, and you didn't choose me as his stepmother. I fell into this role because of circumstances, not because we made a conscious decision together. If you think it's better for Tommy to have a more traditional arrangement, or if you're not ready for this level of commitment in our relationship, I need to respect that." David was quiet for a long moment, processing Maria's words. He thought about the past month, about coming home each day to find Tommy well cared for and happy, about the peace of mind that came from knowing his son was with someone who truly loved him, about the way his apartment had become a real home with Maria's presence. "Can I ask you something?" David said finally. "If you could design your ideal life, what would it look like?" Maria smiled softly. "I would wake up every morning in a house with you and Tommy. I would make breakfast while you got ready for work, and Tommy would tell us about whatever exciting thing he was planning to do at school that day. When Tommy got home, he would have someone there who cared about his homework and his friendships and his dreams. When you came home from work, we would all have dinner together and talk about our days. Tommy would have parents who loved him and each other, who made him feel secure and valued and supported." She looked down at her hands. "I know that's probably more than you bargained for when we started dating. Most people don't meet someone and immediately acquire a ready-made family with all the responsibilities that entails." David stepped closer to Maria, taking her hands in his. What if I told you that your ideal life sounds exactly like what I want too? What if I told you that watching you care for Tommy has shown me the kind of person I want as his mother and as my partner? What if I said that I can't imagine our family without you in it anymore? Maria looked up at David with tears in her eyes. Do you really mean that? I mean it completely, David said. Maria, you didn't just help Tommy recover from pneumonia. You showed both of us what unconditional love looks like. You chose to become part of our family when it would have been easier and cheaper and safer to walk away. Tommy needs you, but so do I. I need someone who loves us both enough to sleep on hospital floors and reorganize their entire life to take care of us. The decision to build a life together wasn't made in a moment of romantic impulse, but rather through careful planning and honest conversations about the practical realities of blending their lives. Tommy's full recovery took another month, during which David and Maria had time to discuss their expectations, their goals, and their concerns about creating a stable family unit. Maria officially moved in with David and Tommy 3 months after the hospital crisis. She gave up her sister's crowded apartment and combined her belongings with theirs, creating a home that reflected all three of their personalities. Tommy was thrilled to have Maria as a permanent presence in his life, and he threw himself into helping her organize her things and find places for her books and kitchen gadgets. The transition wasn't without challenges. David and Maria had to learn how to navigate the daily realities of parenting together, making decisions about Tommy's discipline, his education, and his social activities. They discovered that they had different approaches to some aspects of child rearing. Maria was more structured and organized in her methods, while David was more relaxed and intuitive. But they found that their different strengths complemented each other well, creating a balanced approach that served Tommy's needs. Tommy's school friends and teachers quickly accepted Maria as his mother figure. She attended parent-teacher conferences, volunteered for school events, and became involved in the parent community. Some people were curious about their family structure. Maria was clearly not Tommy's biological mother, but their bond was obvious to anyone who saw them together. Miss Tommy's second-grade teacher pulled Maria aside after a school holiday party to comment on the transformation she had witnessed in Tommy. I have to tell you, when Tommy was out sick earlier this year, I was worried about him. He had always been a good student and a sweet child, but he seemed to carry some sadness that was unusual for his age. Since he's been back, he's like a different child. He's more confident, more engaged, and he talks about his family with such pride and joy. The teacher paused thoughtfully before continuing. I don't know the details of your family situation, and it's not my business anyway. But I can tell you that whatever you and his father are doing, it's working beautifully. Tommy is thriving in ways that go far beyond academic achievement. He feels loved and secure, and that foundation affects everything else in his life. Maria felt a deep satisfaction hearing about Tommy's emotional growth. She had worried that the trauma of his serious illness might have lasting effects on his confidence and his ability to trust that the important people in his life would stay. But with consistent love and support, Tommy had not only recovered physically, but had grown stronger emotionally. David's construction company began offering better health insurance options, which provided financial relief and peace of mind for their growing family. David also started taking evening classes to become a certified project manager, a goal that Maria encouraged and supported. She would help Tommy with homework while David studied, and she managed the household schedule to ensure that everyone had time for their responsibilities and their personal growth. The change in David's career prospects was significant. The construction industry was booming in their area, and skilled project managers were in high demand. David's experience as a crew worker gave him practical knowledge that, combined with formal training, made him an attractive candidate for higher-paying positions with better benefits and more stable hours. As David's income improved and their financial situation stabilized, they began planning for the future in more concrete ways. They started looking at houses with better schools in safer neighborhoods. Maria researched different school districts and extracurricular opportunities that would support Tommy's interests and talents. They began saving money for family vacations, college funds, and home ownership. Tommy's 8th birthday was the first major celebration they planned together as a complete family. Maria organized a party that reflected Tommy's current interests. He had become fascinated with space exploration during his recovery period, when Maria had brought him books about astronauts and planets to keep him entertained during long days of rest. The party featured a solar system theme, with decorations that Maria and Tommy created together during craft sessions over several weeks. Maria baked a cake shaped like a rocket ship, and David built a telescope viewing station in the backyard where Tommy and his friends could look at the stars. The party was a huge success, but the most meaningful moment came when Tommy stood up to thank everyone for coming. "I want to thank my dad for being the best dad ever," Tommy announced in his serious 8-year-old voice. "And I want to thank my mom Maria for taking such good care of me when I was sick, and for helping me not be scared anymore. She slept on the floor next to my hospital bed so I wouldn't be alone, and she still checks on me every night to make sure I'm okay." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes as Tommy referred to her as "my mom Maria," so naturally, and with such obvious love. The other parents at the party smiled at the sweet declaration, but Maria knew that Tommy's words represented something profound about the family they had created together. After the guests went home and Tommy was asleep, Maria and David sat in their backyard looking up at the same stars they had been showing the children earlier that evening. The spring air was warm, and they could hear the gentle sounds of their neighborhood settling down for the night. "He called you his mom tonight," David said quietly. "I noticed," Maria replied. "How do you feel about that?" David was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I feel like it's the most natural thing in the world. You are his mother in every way that matters. You've been there for every important moment since his illness. You know his fears and his dreams. You make decisions about his welfare every day. The fact that you didn't give birth to him seems like the least important detail about your relationship." Maria leaned against David's shoulder, feeling the contentment that comes from being exactly where you belong. "I never expected my life to take this direction. When I was younger, I thought becoming a mother would happen in the traditional way. Meet someone, fall in love, get married, plan a pregnancy. But this feels so much more meaningful because we all chose each other consciously, with full knowledge of what we were committing to. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Tommy calling from his bedroom window. He had woken up and was looking for them, still anxious sometimes when he couldn't immediately locate the important people in his life. Maria went upstairs to tuck him back in, reassuring him that she and David were just outside and would be there in the morning. As she was leaving Tommy's room, he grabbed her hand. "Maria, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "Are you and Dad going to get married?" Tommy asked with the directness that only children possess. "I mean, you already live here and you're already my mom, but are you going to make it official?" Maria was touched by Tommy's question, but also aware that this was a conversation she needed to have with David first. "Would you like it if we got married?" she asked. "Yes," Tommy answered without hesitation. "I want us to be a real family forever. I want to know that you're not going to leave even if something bad happens again." Maria's heart ached with love for this little boy who had experienced abandonment and was now seeking reassurance about permanence. "Tommy, whether or not Dad and I get married, I am never going to leave you. You are my son, and I am your mother, and that's not going to change no matter what. Marriage is about making promises to each other in front of other people, but the love we have is already real and permanent." She sat back down on the edge of his bed. "But I promise you that if Dad and I do decide to get married, you'll be the first to know, and you'll be an important part of the ceremony." "Okay." Tommy smiled and settled back into his pillow, satisfied with her answer. As Maria went back downstairs, she realized that Tommy's question had crystallized something that she and David had been circling around for months. They were already functioning as a married couple and a family unit. The question was whether they wanted to formalize that commitment through marriage. When she returned to the backyard, David could see from her expression that Tommy had raised an important topic. "Let me guess," he asked when we're getting married. "He did," Maria confirmed. "He wants to know that our family is permanent and official. I think the idea of marriage represents security for him, proof that the adults in his life are committed to staying together." David stood up and took Maria's hands, looking directly into her eyes. "Maria, I need to tell you something. I bought a ring 3 weeks ago." Maria's eyes widened in surprise. "You did?" "I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment, but I keep realizing that every moment with you feels right," David continued. "I don't want to wait for some perfect romantic scenario. Our love isn't based on perfect romantic moments. It's based on choosing each other during the difficult times, supporting each other through challenges, and building something real together." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Maria, you chose to love Tommy when he was sick and scared and needed someone to believe in his recovery. You chose to love me when I was overwhelmed and struggling to balance work and fatherhood. You chose to reorganize your entire life to help us build a family. Now I'm choosing you, officially and permanently." David got down on one knee in their backyard, under the same stars they had been showing Tommy and his friends earlier that evening. "Maria, will you marry me?" Will you officially become Tommy's mother and my wife? Will you let us make this family permanent and legal and celebrated?" Maria felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at this man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. Their relationship had been forged through crisis and strengthened through daily commitment to each other's welfare. They had already proven that their love could withstand stress, financial pressure, medical emergencies, and the complex challenges of blending their lives around a child's needs. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you. I will be Tommy's mother officially and legally. I will be your wife and your partner and your family forever." As David slipped the ring onto her finger, they heard a sound from Tommy's bedroom window. Looking up, they saw Tommy watching them from his window, having heard enough of the conversation to understand what had just happened. His face was lit up with the biggest smile they had ever seen. Did you say yes?" he called down to them. "I said yes," Maria called back. "We're going to be a married family." Tommy let out a cheer that probably woke up half the neighborhood, but Maria and David didn't care. They were too busy laughing and crying and holding each other, celebrating the moment when their chosen family became an engaged family, when their commitment to each other became a promise to build a life together forever. The wedding planning became a family project. Tommy insisted on being involved in every decision, from the color of the flowers to the flavor of the cake. He designed his own outfit as the ring bearer and wrote his own speech about how happy he was that Maria was officially becoming his mother. Maria's family, who had watched her transformation during Tommy's illness and recovery, welcomed David and Tommy with open arms. David's extended family, who had worried about him raising Tommy alone, were thrilled to see him with someone who clearly adored both him and his son. The wedding ceremony was held in the same backyard where David had proposed, decorated with the space theme that had become special to their family. Tommy walked Maria down the aisle, proudly announcing to all the guests that he was giving away his mom to his dad so they could all be married together. In her wedding vows, Maria spoke about how love isn't always planned or expected, but how the most meaningful relationships are the ones where people choose each other not just during the easy times, but especially during the difficult ones. She promised to love Tommy and David not just when things were going well, but especially when life presented challenges that required them to support each other with everything they had. David's vows focused on gratitude, gratitude for Maria's love for Tommy, gratitude for her willingness to become part of their family during a crisis, and gratitude for the way she had shown them both what unconditional love looked like in action. But the most touching moment came when Tommy read his speech about his new family. He talked about how scared he had been when he was sick, and how Maria had made him feel safe by staying with him in the hospital. He thanked her for sleeping on the floor next to his bed and for taking care of him when he needed help. He promised to be a good son to her and to help take care of their family the way she had taken care of him. As Maria and David exchanged rings and promised to love each other forever, Tommy stood beside them holding a bouquet of flowers, beaming with pride about his role in the ceremony. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Tommy cheered louder than anyone else, celebrating not just their marriage, but the official recognition of the family they had already built through love, commitment, and the choice to care for each other no matter what challenges they faced. Their honeymoon was a family trip to the planetarium and space center that Tommy had been wanting to visit. It was the perfect celebration for a family that had found each other through circumstances they never could have planned, but had chosen to stay together through love that was stronger than any obstacle. Maria's willingness to sleep on a hospital floor to care for a sick child had grown into a marriage based on the understanding that real love means showing up for each other, especially when it's difficult, expensive, or inconvenient to do so. Years later, when Tommy was grown and people asked him about his childhood, he would always talk about how lucky he was to have a mother who chose to love him not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He would describe how Maria's care during his illness had taught him what commitment looked like in action, and how their family had been built on the foundation of people choosing each other daily, through both joyful and difficult times. The story of how his parents met and fell in love wasn't a traditional romance, but it was something better. It was a story about real love that was proven through actions rather than just words. Love that created a family strong enough to weather any storm that life might bring their way. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Instead of being thrown together by crisis, they were now choosing each other with full understanding of what family life would entail. They were choosing love that included responsibility, commitment that included sacrifice, and a future that included all the beautiful chaos of raising a child together. The foundation for their future as a family had been laid on the floor of that hospital room, where Maria had chosen comfort for Tommy over comfort for herself, where she had demonstrated that love isn't about convenience or obligation, but about showing up when people need you most, regardless of the cost to yourself.